Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening. I want to welcome you all. My name is Harold Bailey. I'm the chair of TEAM Westport, the town's committee responsible for making Westport increasingly welcoming with respect to race, religion, ethnicity, and LGBTQIA, and belonging in general. This is Bernestine McLeod, who is secretary of TEAM Westport. I'll speak in a moment. I did want to say that with respect to welcoming you, I want to welcome you for TEAM Westport, for the town of Westport, for the Westport Library, and most importantly, for Fairfield County's Community Foundation today. When we talk about TEAM Westport, if you take a look at our symbol, or in the lower left-hand corner there, it really is a symbol that has the strands of our community horizontally, so whether it's race, religion, ethnicity, gender, disability, anything you could think of, horizontally, set against those same strands vertically. And the purpose of that is to show the interconnection that each and every community has with the other community, but also the connection we all have to each other in our town when we're talking about welcoming. And if you're going to talk about working together as a community and understanding each other and all those different strands and their interactions, nothing's more important than having knowledge. Each of us having knowledge of the other and how we got to where we are. And there's nothing more seminal of that in this country than the issue of wealth. And that's why we are really excited about being able to host this event tonight with 15 cents on the dollar, and what a marvelous work it is. Bernstein?
Well, good evening. I feel extremely fortunate this evening since we're delving into such a very important topic, along with a great audience and great participants who will soon join us here on the stage. But selfishly and proudly, I will take a moment of personal privilege, having served in some capacity with each of this evening's sponsors. At one point in time, simultaneously, I still serve on TEAM Westport, but I've served on the boards of the Westport Library and Fairfield County's Community Foundation. So, a special welcome on that. My direct association with the foundation has spanned 18 years, during which time 3 wonderful, committed, and dedicated women have served as president and CEO, including our current president and CEO, Mendi Blue Paca. Thank you. Over time, members of the board were always strategizing as to how to raise awareness about the foundation within our county and how to garner support for it. Folks to set up donor-advised funds, folks to donate to community funds and initiatives, folks to be aware of the forces within our county and how we can all have impact. The foundation has been a secret gem that needed to be known and appreciated more. Well, the foundation has evolved and is now presenting more and more of a face to our community, with the end to have our community involved in and informed about issues of the day and ways to address them. This is very important in Fairfield County since we know about the extremes of have and have-nots. So I'm happy that you are here this evening at one of these events and invite you and encourage you to support more events in the future, as well as the foundation itself and our other partners. But tonight, we are focusing on aspects of the foundation's valuable work. So as a backdrop for today's program, let me tell you something about Mendi Blue Paca. Mendi, as I said, is president and CEO of the Fairfield County's Community Foundation. The foundation is our county's regional funder, capacity builder, and philanthropic investment manager of $275 million in assets that partners with our community to ensure that every county resident has an equitable opportunity to thrive. Her work brings together different entities in our county, nonprofits, the business sector, elected and administrative officials, external constituent groups, as well as other grant makers to achieve positive systems-level change in our county. She joined the foundation in 2018 as the Chief Community Impact Officer and VP of Community Impact, taking the helm as President and CEO in October 2022. Mendi began her career as a registered broker and compliance officer at Goldman Sachs. She was a strategy manager at the Center for Effective Philanthropy, growth, and an innovation advisor to the president of the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, and, as you can see, a range of experience. She has served as a strategic consultant to dozens of the largest US-based philanthropic organizations, including these foundations: the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, David and Lucille Packard Foundation, and Walton Family Foundation. When she returned to Connecticut in 2013, which is her home state, she held public sector leadership roles and managed political campaigns. In these capacities, she secured millions of dollars in competitive state, federal, foundation, individual, and corporate resources to advance community goals. Mendi holds a bachelor's degree from Harvard College, cum laude, a JD from Harvard Law School, and an MBA from Harvard Business School, so she's triple Harvard. She's a member of the New York Federal Reserve's Community Advisory Group. She was a board member of the Connecticut Council for Philanthropy and other partnerships locally, as well as the Harvard Business School Community Partners of Connecticut. She is passionate about entrepreneurship, maternal and reproductive health, and mental health equity. In her spare time, she loves entertaining and trying new recipes. Yay. So it is my distinct pleasure, after that wonderful bio, to welcome to the stage Mendi Blue Paca, who will lead the program for now.
Well, you know a lot about me now, so I feel like I don't have much I have left to say. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Bernstein. And thank you to Harold and Bernstein. Those of you that are from Westport know what pillars of this community the Baileys are, and we are grateful to have them and for the work that they do, not just in this community, but in the broader Fairfield County community. So as Bernstein shared, the Community Foundation was established almost 3 decades ago by a committed group of Fairfield County residents, not unlike those sitting in the room today, and community change makers who wanted to improve the conditions facing our region. Over the last 30 years, the Community Foundation has issued more than $400 million in strategic grants. Yet, in many ways, as the challenges grow in our region and become amplified, we are just getting started scaling our impact. So I'm not gonna say much more about what we do, but we do focus on a couple key areas, including improving affordable, safe, and sustainable housing, investing in innovative economic mobility programs so assets can be built and passed on. We'll talk a lot about that today. Creating more access to health care and better outcomes, especially for women and girls in our community, and increasing educational, career, and development opportunities. To accomplish these goals, as Bernstein shared, we bring together partners from across the county. We fund and invest in nonprofits, and we help folks collaborate, co-create, and create solutions. In our work, we are seeking not just opportunity, but equitable opportunity, meaning fair and just opportunity, and particularly for those who have faced unique present and historic barriers to wealth, health, and career success. We seek a Fairfield County where everyone is included in society's promise, possibility, and prosperity. And this is why I am so grateful to have Louise Story and Ebony Reed here to discuss their important work, 15 Cents on the Dollar, How Americans Made the Black-White Wealth Gap. A book that calls us to reckon with the realities of systemic economic inequity in our county, in our country. The authors note, typical Black families in the United States have 15 cents on the dollar compared to typical white families. It's a figure that has not changed much for generations. Not only do Louise and Ebony offer hard data on the realities of the Black-white wealth gap in America, but they also offer critical historical context and real-world stories about how this persistent wealth gap affects people today. We see through their work that racial economic inequality is an issue of both yesterday and today, but we also learn that it does not have to define our future. Ebony and Louise offer examples of how things might change and examples of communities doing promising work to achieve new outcomes. And they invite us to challenge ourselves, noting, as you start to learn about the causes and symptoms of the racial wealth gap, you'll see more contours of it in your daily life. You'll see people differently. You'll have a choice. Do you look away or do you look straight into it? Do you sit still or do you look to build bridges? The Community Foundation is steadfast in our mission to build bridges that lead to collective action so that we can co-create a Fairfield County where everyone can thrive. We choose action every day. So it's my pleasure to introduce these two powerhouse journalists, Louise Story and Ebony Reed, who have individually earned many accolades for their work as practitioners and teachers of the next generation of journalists and business leaders. And their current work, 15 Cents, has garnered well-deserved praise from thought leaders and noted media outlets like The New Yorker, The New York Times, Oprah's Best Books of 2024, and I just learned today, now the New York Times list of... the New Yorker's list of Best Books of 2024. So we are very fortunate to have them with us. Welcome, Ebony and Louise. We'll hear from them, then they will moderate a panel, and then we'll have lots of opportunity to interact with all of you as the evening progresses. Thank you.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here tonight. And I will talk a little bit about our project and how we came together to do this book. If you could just think back to the summer of 2020 after George Floyd was killed, you may have read something online or in the news. You might have actually been out at one of the protests or know someone who was. And it was in that time that we came together to work on this book. Louise and I, we were working together at the Wall Street Journal. We were colleagues, and we were having conversations just like many people were across the country that summer. And as a part of those conversations, we started reading books together. Louise is based on the East Coast. I'm based in Kansas City, Missouri, and so a lot of our conversations were over Zoom. There must be a Kansas City person out there. And so we realized that there's no book that had ever been created that was the full history of the Black-white wealth gap and included current day people that are still living. And we thought with our backgrounds as journalists that we would be the perfect pair to take on this project. Louise covered, Wall Street during the 2008 economic crisis, and I was leading local news at the Detroit News during that time. So we have strong backgrounds in financial and community journalism. For us, this project has actually become more than a book. it has become a public impact project. So this is about the 15th community symposium gathering that we've participated in or put together that focuses on racial wealth gaps. We're donating profits from our book, which you can see in the front of the book. And we also co-teach a course that we designed at the Yale School of Management in Connecticut. Our project has 3 goals. So the first is to make 15 cents on the dollar a nationally recognized statistic. We think if more people understood the statistic and the implications, it would impact conversations across our country. The next is to spur those conversations. So we hope that tonight you will think about something that you've maybe learned, or maybe something here sparks something that you thought about in the past, or maybe something you want to do different in the future. And that will lead to more conversations in your community. And then the third thing is that we're trying to create more empathy in society. And so we're already starting to see some impact from this project. While it's nice to be listed on the list of best books, we also, really find the messages that we've received from people, the emails, for example, from Lonnie Bunch, who's the head of the Smithsonian and also established the African American Museum in DC, who wrote us. We find that really inspiring and touching with all the work that went into this book. And also just getting together with communities has also been something that has touched us.
Thank you. So since our #1 goal is to make 15 cents on the dollar a nationally recognized statistic, you're going to need to learn about this data point right now. So get ready for a few graphs, and then as you saw, we have a goal of spreading empathy. We do that in the book through stories of people, and Ebony will speak about one of those after I go through a little data. I'm going to move fairly quickly, but in the Q&A you can ask about the data. You can also come up to us individually afterwards and ask more. So first of all, before I show you the data, I just want to say, what is wealth? Well, this is something a lot of people have a different understanding of. And even at Yale, where we've taught, and you ask MBA students to define wealth, you get definitions all over the map. People very frequently confuse wealth with income. We say we're doing this book on the Black-White Wealth Gap, and they say, well, the person who sits next to me is of a different race, and they make the same income, so what's the problem? But they don't realize wealth is different. And people a lot of times forget about debt. They think if someone has a nice house or a nice car, they're wealthy, but you don't know what debt is there or what student debt people have. So wealth is assets minus liabilities. That's the definition from the Federal Reserve. And I just wanted you to keep that in mind. And just watch, when you start telling to someone tomorrow you went to this really amazing event about the Black-White Wealth Gap, they're gonna start talking to you about pay equity. Because that just very frequently happens. So this is data from the Federal Reserve. It's the Survey of Consumer Finance. It comes out once every 3 years. We're showing you the graphics literally as the Fed presents them. And this right here shows you the median wealth by racial group. This data goes through 2022. It came out a year ago, and there won't be new data for a couple more years. You can see here the median white family household wealth, Black, Hispanic, Asian was broken out in this most recent data release for the first time. Before this time, they were always included in the other category. So you'll see in historical data, there's not an Asian line because they're in the other category. So you can see a gap right there. But also want to show you, this is since 1989 when this survey has been going on. The top line is white, and then the second line, pink, is other, which includes Asian, and then you can see the orange and the green are Black and Hispanic. And wanted to show you that the shape of this is very similar for both when you compare the median household by race, but also when you compare the average or mean level of wealth by race. You can see the gap is about the same size, very similar, and in fact, 15 cents on the dollar is the level right now when you compare the median and the mean. It's not always exactly the same, but this release, it was 15 cents on the dollar for both. This is important to know because one of the most common questions we get is, well, is this gap only caused by the billionaires? Is it just those white billionaires at the top and they pull it up? If it was only caused by the billionaires, it would only show up in the mean, in the average, right? Because the billionaires pull up those aggregate amounts. But the median, that's you line everyone up from the highest, the lowest, and the middle. And if you took off 20 billionaires in the median, it wouldn't really change the level. And so the gap exists in both because it's a gap that runs through distributions. Okay, so wanted to show you, this is data we feature in the book. It's data that was put together by some University of Bonn and Princeton economist. It's data from 1860 to the present. This shows the average black wealth divided, this one, I'm sorry, shows the average white wealth divided by the average black wealth. So you can see after the Civil War, it was 60 to 1. So the average white household had 60 times the wealth of the average black household right after the Civil War. And you can see it drops down. And it actually kind of looks like, when you look at it like this, that there's been all this progress and it's almost gone. And this is the most frequent way when you've seen people talk about this gap, they talk about it, which is white wealth divided by black wealth. And we had this realization one day that you could also look at the inverse. You could divide the average black wealth divided by the average white wealth. And when you look at that, you see a different story. So this is right after the Civil War. The average black family had 1.6 cents in the dollar compared to the average white family. And that went up, and you can see it went up to 15 cents in the dollar in the 1950s, and then it went up to 22 cents in the dollar in 1992, and now it's back at 15 cents in the dollar, which was the level in the 1950s. And all of this green is the gap, and you can see it's just still a humongous amount. These are some factors that you see that run through and input into it. I'm going to keep moving a little bit just for the sake of time, but this is also from the Federal Reserve, and you can see the gap is just in every single one of them. Also, this is, shows you that people in different racial groups gain or lose wealth differently. So for example, this shows you 2019 to 2022, and it shows you that actually Black Americans, the pink on the bottom negative, that's their retirement savings. And so they lost wealth in their retirement savings in that 3-year pandemic span. That tends to happen when there's a downturn. Something we say in the book is that when, it's a famous quote, when Manhattan gets a cold, Harlem gets pneumonia, and that you see that in a downturn. Just to go a little bit more, you can see the gap in unemployment. You can see it in earnings. Income is an input to wealth, but different from wealth. And then I'm going to show you a few Connecticut stats before we go to the human side, but I wanted to show you one calculation that also gets to one of our most common questions. We also get questions about, well, how long until this gap will go away? And so we did a very basic calculation looking at comparing the median families from 1989 to the present and the rate that the gap has converged since 1989 to the present. So here you can see it was 6 cents on the dollar in 1989. You can see it went up, it went down, it went back up. If this rate changes if it changes at the pace it's been changing since 1989, it would be 291 years until the black-white wealth gap is gone. And so we share this not to be negative, but because we hear a lot of people say, you know, things are changing, maybe by the time my kids are grown up, it'll be gone. And we think people need to understand the pace at which it's moving, because when people don't understand the reality, in fact, there's statistics that show like 40% of Americans think there is no black-white wealth gap, then it would affect what they would say about banking or education or housing or all kinds of programs. Now, if you want to be more optimistic, you could say, well, what if it never goes down? You know, this has some ups and downs. What if it goes at the rate it went since 2013? And that would be 120 years. And if the most optimistic would be, what if it goes at the rate it's gone since 2019? That would be 91 years. But by any figure. Let me show you just a couple Connecticut data points before we get to a story. This is some data points that show you that the gaps are very much here in terms of net worth in Connecticut. These are Connecticut state data points, the household net worth. You can see for white families is significantly more than black families. Households with zero net worth, the gap it just shows throughout Connecticut very much mirrors the national average, and you can see the 9% of white households in Connecticut have zero net worth, but it's 31% of black households, for example. We have a chapter in the book about bankruptcy, and that you can see how that plays out for people who just don't have positive net worth. Homeownership rate. Median household income shows the same picture. There's the gap with unemployment rate. I'm only going through these a little quickly for time, but happy to talk more about any of these with you. This one I just wanted to show you specifically because of this gathering that we're at. So with the Community Foundation, here we are in Westport, is Fairfield County versus Connecticut. So this is income. It wasn't possible. Wealth data, one of the things is it's not available in the most granular way. So this is income, not wealth. But I thought very interesting, you can see that for the whole state of Connecticut, the difference in income from Black to white people is about 50% up. The white people were making median of about 50% more. But in Fairfield County, it's double. So you can see a bigger gap in Fairfield County between the income of these groups. With that, I will turn it back to Ebony for you to meet someone that's featured in our book.
So I will read a passage about Brooke Bacon, whose 61-year-old father, named Julian, was killed by a white police officer. Brooke is a Black American, and he is married to a white woman named Shayla. In our book, we tell their family's economic story. This is from page 144. The news of Julian Lewis's death turned Brooke and Shayla Bacon's world upside down, as if it weren't already upside down enough. Brooke was unemployed, covering his earnings through the COVID-related federal stimulus package. The pair had long ago paid off Shayla's college debts, but they were still working to pay off Brooke's. They had refinanced their house. Staring at their financial statements, they saw the reality of their inequality more clearly than ever. Whereas they had been earning at equal levels when they purchased the home in 2012, 8 years later, Shayla earned 2 times as much as Brooke had most recently made. They talked through that summer of 2020 about the racism they felt Brooke had experienced in his last job. They discussed how he had been promoted less often in jobs over the years compared to Shayla. He worked in finance, but was still in entry-level jobs in his 40s. Now with Brooke's father having been killed, Shayla was rethinking their past decisions. In addition to Brooke's day jobs, he had worked seasonal shifts at FedEx to earn Christmas present money. But that temporary job was the overnight shift. It meant he was out driving late at night and he was pulled over by police 3 times. Shayla felt guilty. Why had she let him work overnight shifts? Why, she asked herself, had she not realized how at risk her husband was? The thoughts kept racing through Shayla's mind. Why hadn't she realized until Julian's death that she too was at risk from the system and the upbringing Brooke had? Even financially, her earnings were now helping to pay off his student loans. As she said, I never considered that entering into an interracial marriage, that by doing so, I would be assuming systemic racist debt. She said she wouldn't change anything based on that realization, but she now understood she was tied to Black Americans in a way that many white Americans were not. And she said, I have more skin in the game because now it's my family, it's my problem, it's my money. She also thought a lot about the lengths to which Brooke's mother, Tanita, had gone raising Brooke as a single mom in Julian's absence, for Brooke's mobility and success. She had his interest entirely in mind, Shayla said. Tanita was literally doing it all for Brooke. Just want to get myself organized here. In that story of Brooke, we learn the building blocks of wealth and wealth gaps in his family. And so in our book, you'll learn about his tough experience with student loans and how he moved around a lot as a child, as his mother was trying to seek better economic conditions for their family. As a child, he sometimes slept on friend and family sofas, and he dreamed of the day that he would be a homeowner. You'll also learn in our book how his mother became a homeowner, but she was a victim of the 2008 financial crisis. She had a bankruptcy, And you'll also learn in our book, Reporting, how Black and white Americans, as Louise mentioned earlier, have different experiences in bankruptcy court. And you'll learn about the justice system as we chronicle Brooke's fight for justice for his father. I do want to dwell for a second on something that involved Brooke and his student loans. A lot of our book is about challenging perceptions. And when you hear, for example, that someone started college and didn't finish, you might make some assumptions about that person. People might think, well, maybe that person was partying, or they couldn't cut it, or they weren't working hard enough. But in the case of Brooke, he had to leave Northeastern University through no fault of his own after he finished one trimester with good grades. The explanation of what happened started before he even started school. And if we look back at his freshman year, before he started, the university signed off on student loans for him and approved the loans before he started. Attending college was a big deal for Brooke and his family because he was the first to attend. Neither of his parents had gone to college. But there he was as a freshman with his loans approved, having finished his first trimester with good grades, and the school called him and said, "There's an issue with your loan." There was a blank page on his papers that required a cosigner. He didn't have any family members with enough assets to back his loans, and this had not been brought to his attention before. He called his uncles, his grandparents. No one could cosign for him. When he told the financial aid office that he did not have a cosigner, he had to leave. It would take him years to pay off debt for a degree that he wouldn't be allowed to complete. So this is a storyline with student loans that may not have occurred to some people in our book.
With that, I'd love to invite the panelists up and to continue the conversation. We do make personal recommendations in the book. I'll just mention one as the panelists come up. At the end of our book is nonpartisan. We don't make particular policy recommendations, but we talk about things you could do in your own life that we think would add up a lot. And for example, one recommendation that we make is that more people should undertake a serious partnership with someone of a very different background with them, perhaps someone of a different race or a different economic level. And we mean a partnership where you have time and money and reputation on the line, and that by seeking an equitable situation with someone with a very different lived experience, you will learn a lot about this give and take society needs. And this is something that we have experienced in the process of doing this book, and so that's one of our recommendations, and happy to talk about more later. So if the panelists could come on up. So we have Mendi, who you got the introduction to already, and Mendi, thank you so much for doing this with us and welcoming us here. And then we have Andrea Comer, thank you, the Chief of Staff for the Office of the State Treasurer, and she'll be talking about many things they're doing, including the groundbreaking baby bonds program here in Connecticut. And we have Representative Paris, who is State Representative and Chief Impact Officer of Person-to-Person Financial Opportunity Center and has worked a lot in student loan debt relief. So thank you all.
Thank you. I think we'll start with talking about how you define wealth and how do you consider factors like race, ethnicity, and gender in shaping your understanding of wealth. And Corey, maybe we'll start with you because I think, did you yell out for Kansas City?
Yes, but really Kansas City, Kansas, not Missouri.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see.
There is a difference.
There is a difference.
I'll tell you, wealth, and that's a perfect segue because I think wealth is defined very differently in every part of this country. And I often tell people, so I was born in Little Rock, Arkansas. I grew up a large part of my life in Kansas City, Kansas, which I've been a lifelong Chiefs fan, even when they lost. But wealth to especially people of color and black families in Kansas City versus wealth to black families who were born and ingrained here in Connecticut is institutionalized in its discrimination. My great-great-grandfather escaped slavery over the Missouri River. He'd taken a boat, met the Wyandotte Indian tribe, and they gave him a piece of land for which our family farm is still on to this day. And that is the greatest single piece of wealth that we have in our family. And what that wealth means to us is that it allowed for us to understand agriculture, it allowed for us to understand how to farm, work the land, be able to become entrepreneurs and business leaders in our own right, but it allowed every generation afterwards to systemically branch out in ways that only white families, especially here in New England, would have that access. So to be able to be here in Connecticut and seeing the disparities that are so far and few between in comparison to places like Kansas City, where the wealth gap is much closer in comparison with its white counterparts, being here is institutionalized racism, and we have to be able to combat that as best as we possibly can.
Wow. Andrea, what do you think? How do you think about wealth and define it?
So first, I want to thank FCCF for hosting this. Thank you both for shining a light on the disparity. Thank you all for being here. When I think about wealth, I think about my dad, who was a VP at Merrill Lynch. My mom was a professor. They were intending to buy a house to raise their 2 daughters in Westchester County in New York. Every time they showed up, the house was no longer available for one reason or another. Well, one reason in particular. And so I ended up growing up in a townhouse in Yonkers, which was fine, and they invested in us in other ways. I went to private school, my sister went to Catholic school, but fast forward, and there was no property for me, right, or for my sister. My sister actually still lives in the townhouse where we grew up, paying rent. I wanted to make sure that I had something to leave my daughter, so bought a piece of property. You know, I have a condo. It's nothing super fancy, but I'm gonna make sure that she has it, because that's what wealth means. It's less about how much money you're making, what your paycheck looks like, and it's more about having access and opportunity, and wealth comes with that. I am as I said, the daughter of a financial services professional and an educator, but I'm also the granddaughter of a domestic and a seamstress. And the distinction is around access and opportunity.
Thank you. Mendi, how do you consider factors like race, ethnicity, and gender in shaping the understanding of wealth?
So, you know, I echo what my co-panelists have shared about the important lens of generational transfer, right? And that's really critical, because what you just said, Andrea, completely resonated with me. Like, so you all heard, as I said, a lot about my background. But I'm a first generation college student. My grandmother was a domestic. My parents both completed high school, but neither could complete college because of their financial circumstances. So similarly, I got to Harvard and I learned what Wall Street was at Harvard. I ended up there, but I ended up there in a very different way and with a very different mindset and with very different preparation than someone who sat around a table growing up hearing about that. So I think it's those subtleties that people miss when they don't unpack these things. And the last thing that I'll say about the definition of wealth is it's less in my mind about wealth as a tangible asset or as a financial concept, and it's more about what wealth does. And I think what wealth does is it provides the ability to live a self-directed life. It provides access and opportunity, as Andrea said. It provides moments to be able to rest and recuperate and maintain physical and mental health. And those are all the intangible things that are actually the core things that make a life valuable, that make one feel like they are thriving. And it's all those unspoken things that wealth does for you that I think we miss when we only think about the dollars and cents.
Okay, can you talk, Mendi, about what the Fairfield Community Foundation does to contribute to wealth building in the region?
Sure. I will speak about one thing, and then I will lob it to both my co-panelists, because some of it we do with both of you in part. So I'll start with some stuff we're not doing with you, and then invite you guys to share as well. So one of our most central initiatives right now around wealth, and the way we define it as achieving a county where people have social and economic mobility irrespective of race. And we focus on race because the data is really abysmal in Fairfield County. And I think, you know, we heard some of the national data, but if you all will bear with me for a second, I do want to just share a couple statistics that are just from our county. So Fairfield County, some of you know this, many of you likely don't, has the second highest rate of income inequality of all metropolitan areas in the country. And undeniably, that cuts across lines of race. White households have a median income of about $117,000, more than double $53,000 earned by the median Black and Latino household. Median wealth of white households was 8 times greater than Black households. Home values, which we know are the largest source of wealth in the U.S., are also a key driver. The median home value of homes owned by white people in Fairfield County is $550,000, while the median values for Black and Latino households were $385,000 and $400,000. So I'm not going to go on with the statistics, but we have a lot of data. If you're interested, find any of our staff, we can share more. But I want people to just be really abundantly clear that this is not a national abstract problem. This is very much a Fairfield County reality. And so one of our initiatives is in the space of direct cash assistance. And so we do work around economic and social mobility, and we hear a lot of explanations for why people don't have economic and social mobility and why we have poverty, frankly, in our county. And so we had this brilliant idea that one of the reasons people experience poverty and they don't have money for childcare and they're food insecure and they don't have the ability to maintain their housing securely is because they don't have enough cash. And when we say that, people are like, oh, well, that seems pretty obvious. But we don't treat that as obvious in our society. We try to explain it through lots of other lenses, but we rarely say, well, I wonder if we gave people more money, if that would actually help, or more access to money, if that would actually help them resolve their challenges and achieve greater economic mobility. And so we did a lot of research and we looked at things that were happening around the country, and we realized that that was proving to be true. And in fact, when you give people cash, they use that cash in the ways that you or I would likely use that cash, and they do things that help set them on paths to greater social and economic mobility. So they invest in cars to get back and forth to work reliably, they pay for childcare and elder care, they make investments, they save more, they pay down credit card debt, and there's lots of data of hundreds of now projects and pilots across the country in direct cash where we're seeing that borne out. So we launched last year a direct cash pilot in Fairfield County in partnership with our peer community foundations in New Haven and Hartford. 120 families over the course of 3 years are being invested in to the tune of about $13,000 a year. And we are tracking that data, and we are looking to make a case in Connecticut that direct cash is, in fact, a viable means to helping people achieve mobility, escape poverty, and that it's, frankly, a better way than most of our entitlement systems that make decisions for people rather than trusting them to make their own decisions. So if that's work that's intriguing to you, happy to share more about that. But that's now one of our flagship programs, and at the risk of specifying what you talk about, but I will take the risk, we have partnered with the Treasurer's Office on our baby bonds work, so would love for you to share some about that, and we are funding some of the really wonderful work at P2P that you all are doing around poverty alleviation as well. So.
Sure. So I want to say first, I mentioned that my dad worked in finance, and whatever side of the brain that is that does math, I don't have that dominant side. So I think he'd be really tickled that I'm working in the treasurer's office. That said, I think what I found most exciting about working there is the ways in which we can impact people's lives beyond just math, whether it is our college savings program, whether it is the ABLE program, which is a similar savings program for people with disabilities. But the star of the show, I think in many minds, is the Baby Bonds program. And it's interesting, Mendi, when you talked about health and well-being. So Derek Hamilton, who conceptualized the Baby Bonds program, talks about growing up in Brooklyn, talks about his parents really investing in him and sending him to private school, but losing them very young to what he said is about stress and the extreme impact of working so hard to make sure that he had a future. But the Baby Bonds program in Connecticut is relatively simple. If you have a child who was born on or after July 1st of 2023, and that child's birth was covered by Husky, we automatically make a $3,200 investment or deposit into a trust for that child. When that child reaches, oh, somebody. When that child reaches 18 to 30, they can take that money out to pay for college, to put down on a house, invest in or start a business, or save for retirement. And it may, $3,200 as an investment or a deposit doesn't sound like a lot. By the time they reach that age, depending upon when they take it out, it'll be worth anywhere from $11,000 to $24,000. But we also recognize that just the investment alone is not going to solve the problem, because there are so many things that could happen to that child on that journey from birth to 18, especially if they are living in poverty. So we are working with our philanthropic partners, with our community partners. I see Jennifer here from Norwalk Acts, and we have an ambassadors program. My teammate Gabby is back there. Oh, you moved. She is leading our ambassador program, so if any of you all are involved with a nonprofit or just interested in learning more about ways in which you can communicate the Baby Bonds program to your neighbors, constituents, please see Gabby. She's in the back, because we have to make sure that people know. And I'll stop with this example. So when we first announced that Baby Bonds had been funded, we had a celebration. We had a baby and the baby's parents, I think baby Ethan. And so we had this press conference, and it was great. And then the year comes up, and we're like, oh, let's have a birthday party to sort of mark the 1-year anniversary, and we'll invite some other Baby Bonds babies. We can't find that family. Hospital doesn't know where they are. So that's our biggest challenge, is making sure that we connect with those families at the very start, but then that we are keeping in touch with them. And so we're hoping that our partners will help with that.
That's really interesting. Before we move on, and for the audience, when we've been around the country, we've been around the whole country talking about these issues this whole year. Connecticut's Baby Bond program is coming up everywhere as a program. It really is, as a program that people around the whole country are watching. So we've heard about that. And one thing I just wondered if you could elaborate on is, how you think about race in the program. There's some programs, that specifically focus on race, call out race, and there's other programs that aren't for any particular race, but the way they land will help lift different groups of people differently. Like, for example, one thing many people may not realize, but the student debt forgiveness programs that President Biden was doing were open to everyone. But since Black and Latino households have an average of more student debt, then that would benefit and be, gap decreasing in that sense. So just how are you thinking about race in this?
Sure, so we fully recognize that this is going to be a program that is going to benefit particularly children of color and families of color in closing the wealth gap. That said, similar to like the GI Bill getting passed, and the only way it was going to get passed was if you left implementation to the states, which then exacerbated Black families being able to buy property. The only way we could get this passed was if we made it about being covered by Husky. Also, we had to go to our legislators and let them know there's a baby bond baby in every of the 169 municipalities. So nobody could say, oh, it's not my problem, it's not impacting my community. So, but we are hoping that between programs like baby bonds, programs like guaranteed income, where you're just recognizing that there is a need and people just need cash to get through life, that we are going to be able to close that gap. But again, sometimes if you want to get policy passed, you have to sort of say, shh.
Representative Paris, would love to hear more about your work on student loan.
I voted for it. I just want to say that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so, and I do want to be sure to touch on the financial opportunity centers with person to person, but on the student loan debt piece, I think baby bonds will be able to enable more young people in the future to go to school without the stress of graduating with a lot of debt. But until then, we have the exacerbation of a crisis in our state. Connecticut holds the 5th highest amount of student loan debt in the country. $18.7 billion in student loan debt held in this state by 500,000 borrowers. Of those 500,000 borrowers, nearly 47% of them are people of color. Nearly 52% of them are women. And a staggering fact is that 20 years after you start repaying on your loans, white borrowers have paid up to 90% of their loans off. Black and brown borrowers have only paid up to 9% of their loans off because of the interest. I am someone who understands this. I was proud to choose Connecticut, much to the dismay of my grandmothers in Kansas and Arkansas. And I chose Connecticut because there was a lot of opportunity here in this state. I went to a state institution, proud alum of Western Connecticut State University, and I graduated with probably about $75,000 to $80,000 in debt. Much to the young man's story that was told before, when I moved here as an out-of-state student, I was still paying more money than an in-state student. And when I signed those loans, it was by any means necessary. It was about survival. So in order to get the degree that I needed to attain, in order to have generational wealth for my children and for future generations out of my bloodline, I had to do whatever it possibly took to get through college. In signing that loan, they told me, when I first got accepted, your classes are taken care of, your loan's fine, whatever. I move up here, I go to the financial aid office, I say, I can't get my books. They said, you have a choice. Your classes are covered, your books and your meal plan are not. You get housing and you get your classes, but you have to choose between food or books. I chose books. So I was food insecure for the entire first year of my term here in college. And I started taking a job in admissions. I was working in admissions, giving tours, and something happened in a computer system that said that I was an in-state student the second year and not an out-of-state student. But I say that I'm not as fortunate, many other people aren't as fortunate as me. So when we talk about the disparities in this state, and one of the wealthiest states in the country, and we have nearly a quarter of its members who can literally have debt forgiven that will put $18.7 billion back into our economy, that's more powerful than saying, I'm not forgiving something that you all made the decision to take out. Corporations made a decision to not be on the side of working families, but they got $4 trillion in tax cuts to support them. So that's not an excuse. What we have been doing here in Connecticut, we have created a student loan program, a reimbursement program, that was supported overwhelmingly by Republicans. It was supported by my colleague, Senator C.C. Marr, in the audience. And we had to really finesse this. This program says, if you've lived in Connecticut for 5 years, now Mendi has grown up here her entire life. She was born here, so she has satisfied those 5 years. Andrea has come to school here. She's been here for 2 years as a sophomore and junior, has stayed an additional 3 years as a working employee. Now she's eligible. But if you have been here for 5 years, you are a working employee, whether you are a barista at Starbucks or you're working for a nonprofit organization or for a hedge fund in Greenwich, and you do 50 hours of community service with any certified nonprofit that has a certified status with our state, you are allowed to get $5,000 back on your student loan so long as you pay up to $5,000 on your student loan back. That is not something that many folks in our government have subscribed to. Many things that come out of the executive office are for $50 million for public health workers and doctors to keep them here in this state. Sometimes there are things for police officers and their families. It's not enough to close out people and marginalize communities in a space that will help to lift the rising tides of all boats in our state to move us forward. So we have $6 million for this program. It goes live on January 1. We fought for this program. We fought the governor's office on this program. His program, a fact is a fact, his program has not had as many people coming in to support him, to take advantage of the program. The program focuses on nonprofit organizations and companies that pay on the borrower's loan. They are the employees of the company. And when they pay on the borrower's loan, what they don't realize is that it's a tax burden to the borrower. Indeed pays $10,000 on my loan, and I'm only making $97,000. Now all of a sudden I'm making $107,000 and in a new tax bracket. That is not equity. But for our loan, we're already projecting that 100,000 people will be able to apply for this bill, or apply for this program come January 1st. That is the opportunity of putting $6 million back into our economy and making sure that we are lifting the rising tides of all of these boats across our state.
That's, those are very powerful numbers. And it did spur a question, Mendi, you know, you at FCCF, you fund a lot of different things and partner in these. How do you think about what something what's working, whether it's working, if it's working, and what are you watching around the country, and just how do you think about, okay, we're succeeding, we're moving on this?
So I think, the first part of the answer I'll give you is not going to be satisfying, which is most of it doesn't work, right? That's the truth. And the reason most of these solutions don't work is because most of the solutions are thinking about it through the lens of a program or an intervention. And they're not thinking through the lens of, you have 3 panelists who have shared personal stories just tonight about our own families and our own experiences that are multi-generational. Right? So it was a multi-generational gap that's been built, and a program isn't going to solve a multi-generational gap. And so the way that we think about solutions at the Community Foundation is, how do we, at a systems level, tackle these challenges in ways that are going to actually shift the paradigm and not just be a solution to a symptom of a social problem. So I will say there is some stuff to celebrate in Connecticut, one of which I think is baby bonds, though, as Andrea astutely points out. The challenge with that program in my mind is that it's 18 years till we see the return. So there's a lot of work and a lot of braiding of other initiatives that we need to do in the interim. So we do see the direct cash work as one component, but there's a need for career pathways work. We have a ton of open jobs in our county. We have in the state about 120,000 young people who are unemployed or underemployed, but the two shall never meet because our employers think that people don't have the right skills, and so there's a disconnect there, and so we are trying to connect systems. So we are actually going to be launching in the fall an initiative with hospital systems where we will be connecting the employer, the higher education system, in this case the Connecticut Community State College system, and nonprofit organizations who provide wraparound supports to say, how can these 3 critical entities work together in a more systematized way to help people get on career paths? And it's often the stuff you're not thinking about, right? So when we think about, when we give people a job, right? That's the pathway to closing the wealth gap, we think, even though you guys pointed out wonderfully that it's not about income, or just about income, but income's a component, right? So let's give people jobs. And then we show up a year later and we realize that most of those people aren't in those jobs. And we say, well, what happened? And you know what happened? People were in housing court. because they were housing insecure, or their car broke down so they couldn't make it back and forth, or I was talking to someone just earlier this evening about the astronomical cost of childcare, and they couldn't pay for the childcare, so it wasn't worth it. So that's how we think about programs, but the challenge in the reality is that is expensive work, it is long-term work, it is non-linear work, it is work that requires stomach and patient capital, and we don't have a lot of that, unfortunately. So we've got to build more of that into the system.
No, that really speaks, I just want to say, that really speaks to something that we saw in our research when you look at the 1860 to the present and the different phases of how this gap was held open. In the most recent history of the last 40, 50 years, as you saw in the 1950s, it was 15 cents on the dollar. And in the most recent decades, there has been an expansion of opportunity. Education has been widened. And so people in general are very baffled when they say, like, oh, it's 15 cents on the dollar, what it was in the 1950s. But you're right, it's these wraparound services, because when you offer a lot of opportunities without a means to pay for things or to support them, the needle doesn't move on everything, as much.
Louise, before you move on, I do want to underscore something that Mendi said about childcare. We also saw that in our book with one family where the mother was taking out student loans because college was the only place where she could go and take her kids because she couldn't find adequate childcare while she worked. And I sit on the board of United We, which is formerly named the Women's Foundation of Kansas City, and childcare equity is one of the major platforms of that organization because of the crisis.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Andrea, we are wondering, and I'm sure it's in the mind of everyone here also, how you see the federal shifts in the government and politics affecting the program, affecting your work.
Breathe.
So an effort like baby bonds was, that seed was first planted at the federal level. Senator Booker, Congresswoman Presley have introduced it twice now, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Not a betting woman, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to go anywhere now either if it gets reintroduced. And so I think it's really, I talked about the GI Bill and sort of the positive negative of leaving something to the states to implement. I do think because of where we are as a nation right now, it's going to have to be up to the states to really make a difference in these kind of programs at this point. But I do want to go back from a federal perspective. Corey talked about the student loan issue. And so investments in, like baby bonds or guaranteed income is just one piece of the pie. I think that what I almost was thinking you might say was somebody gets to college, but then they burn through their financial aid because they have to take remedial courses, and then that money is gone. There was an article in the Connecticut Mirror a couple of months ago about this young woman who was graduated from the Hartford Public Schools and could not read. And she had gotten accepted into college, and she can't read. And so we are, from housing policy to education policy to health policy, we really have to be more holistic in terms of how we are approaching wealth and wealth inequities. And in a perfect world, it would happen at the federal level. But again, I think that, each state for now is going to have to make this a priority. And Connecticut, we have a moral imperative to do so because of our wealth gap.
Corey, we didn't get to hear about person to person. Maybe you could tell us a little bit and also address how you see the federal shift affecting your work.
I think that's important because my boss is in the audience and payday's next week, so I probably should say something. So here's the thing with person to person, and I think that, again, what's interesting about person to person is that there are a lot of parallels from the organization's inception to where we are today in America. So Person to Person was founded in 1968 in the aftermath of Dr. King's assassination by very well-meaning volunteers in Darien, Connecticut, on the side of St. Luke's Parish that wanted to just do good and really outside of the mission of the Poor People's Campaign. And today, Person to Person is serving nearly 30,000 families, nearly 2.3 million meals a year to those 30,000 families. But it's focused on making sure that homes are food secure, and that they are thriving financially, and that there's an opportunity to catch them before they go into the wells of poverty. And so with the Financial Opportunity Center, which is the 6th Financial Opportunity Center in the state of Connecticut, there's not many of them. It focuses on employment opportunities. It focuses on one-on-one counseling, financial counseling with folks to know how to budget, to know how to invest and what to do with their money. And it also it focuses on financial resources. Is that right, boss? All right, she shook her head, that's right. But what's most important is that most of the folks that we serve are immigrants. And so when we're talking about how we're serving our public, many of the folks, we have 2 mobile food pantries, plus our main site in Darien and a site in Norwalk, and a warehouse also in Stamford. But the Mecca is really Darien. And when we're talking about mass deportations with this next administration that's coming in, many of the folks who are at risk of being food insecure, who are coming to us for direct services, are going to stop coming to us because they're going to be too afraid to travel into Darien, which is not the most comfortable place always to travel in. Travel to rather, they're gonna stop coming. And so we need to figure out how to make sure that not only are they safe and protected to get the direct services that they need, but how are we still aligning ourselves with our mission, our core value system, to ensure that they are not food insecure. And so because of what's happening on the federal side of things, because we have to think about those who can't afford their rent, and Stamford, for example, has the average rent in Stamford is 52% higher than the national average of rent in the country. We're also giving out cash to folks to help cover their rent. We're seeing a lot of people not wanting to take on that cash incentive, because even if they take what we are able to get them at a max about $700, it's not going to cover even a portion of their rent. So the housing crisis, the food crisis, which we have 47% of people who are food insecure in the country, 14% of them in our state are children. We are in a real timeline because we're seeing states, especially here in Connecticut, where it's good, and Andrea is at the forefront of this every day, focusing on the fiscal health and sustainability of our state. But if we're not able to provide those services because we have to cut back, we're gonna see a lot of disarray going on in our state in communities that we never thought we would see it in.
Mendi, we're about to go to the Q&A. Thank you, Corey. Do you have anything to add on what you're watching around the country, and or how you see the federal shift affecting your approach?
So, I won't repeat what my co-panelists have said here about the expectation that all of these challenges are going to be exacerbated. I think we all have that expectation. But I'll say 2 things in conclusion, and I think they are lanes that I feel like we need to lean into as the most hopeful lanes to try to create some level of consensus in a national environment in which there is very little, right? And so the first is, I think we need to pay attention to what works. And we have examples, and probably the greatest one I can think of is the example of the child tax credit during COVID, where families got a $2,000 tax deduction for children 0 to 5, and I think it was $3,000 for 6 to 17, and we saw child poverty reduced by 30% in this country. Then we just woke up one day and we forgot about it. Literally, that's what happened from a policy perspective. But we need to kind of keep telling that story, both locally, regionally, and nationally, because it's not as if we don't know what works. We've seen direct cash work across the country. We are counting on seeing baby bonds work in Connecticut as the first state to pilot that. But there are stories that we have to amplify. And then I think the last thing I'll say is, and Corey, you let us hear, it's not a zero-sum game. And so closing the wealth gap, expanding opportunity, doesn't mean that everyone else has to lose. Will there be some shifting of power and resources? Yes, potentially. But will we ultimately, in aggregate, be better as a society? Absolutely. And so As just a bit of a preview, actually, in the spring, the Community Foundation will be releasing a report called The Upside of Equity that was federally funded. I don't think it would be federally funded at this point, but it was federally funded under the current administration. And the report is going to demonstrate from an economic perspective what the advantage of closing these equity gaps in our region would be for everyone in aggregate, right? So filling those open positions that companies have, being able to retain and attract employees because young families can afford to live here and send their kids to daycare, and and they can afford, actually, frankly, the cost of public school, which at the end of the day is taxes, right? It'll be able to demonstrate that there is an opportunity. I don't like to say win-win because I think that's a little, unrealistic in some ways, but there is an opportunity for the pie to grow and for everyone to have the potential to benefit.
Thank you. It sounds like a great report. We'll open up for questions over here.
First of all, if everyone could join me, please, in thanking our panelists for such an interesting and informative conversation. And at this point, if anyone does have a question, we invite you to come up to the mic. Also, when it is your turn, if you could please speak directly into the microphone, and also please limit your interaction to one question just so that we can get to as many as possible. So, welcome.
Or not.
Thank you for everyone being on the panel. It's fantastic to hear any opportunity where people want to talk about the inequities that our country is experiencing. My question actually is for you, Corey, in regards to predatory lending that tends to happen with students. As we talk about the gap, right, we have a number of individuals who are seeking to colleges, trying to improve their situations. However, we find that there's a number of schools in the state alone that actually engage in predatory student loan lending. So what is it that the state may be doing to basically make students aware of that as they make their plans for the future in order not to end up in these gaps dealing with debt?
I appreciate that question. And I think the other thing is that people have to realize that student loan debt is literally the one thing that's holding back many people from advancing financially. So your credit score is affected by your student loans because of the debt to income ratio of whether you've paid them back or not. That credit score determines whether or not you're able to buy a car, which you need to enable yourself to go to work. It determines your car insurance rate. I jokingly said last week at a forum, it determines who you marry. Because my fiance said I was the one suitor out of the last 10 years that had the least amount of student loan debt. So it was easier for her to say yes to me than to other people. But what's really interesting about this, right, is that in the state of Connecticut, there's a CHESLA loan that you can take out through the state, but you have to have a co-signer for the CHESLA loan. And what I've seen with a lot of my constituents is that Black and brown folks are not qualified for those CHESLA loans because oftentimes you have to have a co-signer to help support that loan. And when you take out the loan, the interest is much higher on the CHESLA loan than it is a federal loan. But what's even worse is that right now we're seeing people, if they go into deferral and deferment with their loans for whatever reason, and it's been approved by their provider, that provider oftentimes, the loan servicer oftentimes sells their loan to a new servicer, which raises your interest on your loan, which means that it's gonna take you that much longer to pay off the loan. So what we've done here in the state of Connecticut is that we've created a loan ombudsman position, which is looking at the predatory lending of this. I know that Joe Courtney, a congressman here in our state, has been focused on the interest rates and trying to pause or get rid of the interest, which will help people. But at the end of the day, if you want to see the economy change in a matter of seconds in this country, you would have sweeping student loan reform and sweeping student loan forgiveness, because that would enable us to put trillions of dollars back into our economy and would literally allow for families to be able to do so much more with childcare, with buying homes and starting businesses, which is why our student loan reimbursement program is so important, because it enables everyone from a 70-year-old mother who took out a loan to go to school to get an associate's degree at $70,000 in student loan debt, but also took out a loan to help support her daughter to go to college. And in that, they're both now trying to pay back their loans, and she'll never retire. So this is personal, and it's deeply personal across all stages of life. Thank you.
That's a great question. As someone else is coming up, I'll just add, student debt, we saw throughout our book, and it's one of the things that we talk about as invisible. You don't know the person sitting next to you at work, maybe they are making the same pay, but they might have to spend so much more of their pay paying off student loans. So they can't be buying a house. They can't be putting money in their retirement. So we've been really trying to remind people that you don't know what kind of debt people are paying. You don't know if they have negative net worth because they have so much student debt. And so it's a big thing.
Hello, hi, I'm Dion, and first, thank you so much for this book and this opportunity for the open discussion of this wealth gap. I appreciate it so much. So my question is a follow-up from the previous. It seems to me that the education piece is a major part of the wealth gap. As you just stated, it is one of the main things that is attached to our ability to go forward. Credit scores, access to things and such. I am curious as to know when can we have the conversation or at least make a move of suggestion that education should be free.
Yeah.
It should be free, or at least the most not penalize us for it.
I have an answer, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation, and I think there are really smart people on here that are smarter than me that could probably answer that as well. Okay, I have all the permissions. I'm not focused about Kansas City, Missouri. It's fine. Here's the thing. Our state constitution, education is a right. It's embedded in our state constitution. We as legislators, as a legislative political body, we have to provide education to every person in this state. Either it be childcare, which that wasn't included, K-12, or higher education. And I think that is lost upon so many of my colleagues and so many of our elected officials, because like all things in this world, it's become a business. It's become a cash cow. And we have made it so that if you don't have a certain certificate or degree, you cannot get ahead in life. We have forgotten about the trades. We've forgotten about all the things that help to build this country. And so we do need to get to a free spot, but we can't get to a place where education is free until we start to realize how much it is a hindrance, not just to the individual, but to our overall economy. And when we figure that out, when people start to see, I make more money the state will make more money by sending people to school for free. We will have more opportunity by sending the people to school for free. And then that will see our sustainability and our viability as a state grow. I think that's when we'll be in a better spot. But how we get there, we can't get there until we talk about financial literacy, which I've worked on with the Treasurer's Office, and we passed a bill to ensure that every child in this state, in order to graduate from high school, has to take a financial literacy course in which they learn about student loans and the predatory lending. So there's just a lot of work to do, but we all probably have a stakehold in that.
Thank you, I appreciate
I guess the only thing I'd add is, in terms of education, I think it's important for us to remember how much was denied to us, particularly, whether it was the ability to vote, or you had to be able to tell how many pennies were in a jar, you had to be able to read certain things. So I think that we as a people have put such a premium on education, and to your point, it's a business. And because it is a business, I would love for everybody to be able to get a free education, but because of the capitalistic nature of this nation, I don't know how that happens. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, I want to be.
No, I think the conversation should be started as, to his point. I really think, because I'm trying to make this short, but I can't. The way it's going right now, society is demanding that we do get higher education, because that's how we get forward. However, they penalize you when you try to do so. I remember a personal experience of mine when I sent my second daughter to college. And as a person of the low-income public housing sector, not just in Connecticut and Fairfield County, but in Bridgeport, I could not keep my benefits while sending her to college. And they verbally told me that I was supporting someone that no longer lived with me because she was on dorm. And that is literally physically preventing us from going forward. So at some point, if you're gonna do that, then we need to understand that either education should be free, it better be free, or don't penalize us when we try to get to it.
Thank you.
Now I'm done.
It shows how complicated it is. We'll do one last question, but then we want to talk with anyone individually afterwards. One last question, and then Mendi will close. Thank you.
So I'll be quick. So this is for the authors. When was Brooke at Northeastern? I'm a double Husky graduate at Northeastern University, and I'd like to know when that time frame happened.
Absolutely. It was 2000 when he started. He's 43 now, so he graduated high school I think in the class of 99, and that's when it was. And we actually reached out to Northeastern numerous times for comment for this book, and they declined to comment on it. But it was a real setback for him. You'll see in the book as you read the rest of his story that, so he couldn't finish then, he left with all that debt. Then he spent 5 years working first at an ice cream shop, and then he got in a bank teller position, and from that, he's very intelligent, and they found he moved in finance onto a trading floor, and then eventually he got into a program at Brandeis that let people go later in life to college, and did graduate with a lot of student debt that he's still paying off now, but he did graduate, and so in the end, his many aspects of his life have worked out really well and everything, but he is an example of a person who had a bunch of student debt from a degree he didn't get. And a lot of people don't realize this when you talk about student debt, is that a lot of people with this debt don't have the degree to even make the higher income to pay for it. So talk to Northeastern about him, send them to our book, and maybe they'll call us back about him.
Well, send him to the African American Institute at Northeastern University. Have him contact the director of the institute.
Okay.
And tell him his story, and see if that can be a process, a pathway for him to be relieved of some of this debt. And for Mr. Representative, what's the name of the student loan forgiveness program?
Student Loan Reimbursement Program, SLRP. It's not sexy, I understand. But if you look it up online, it's housed through the Office of Higher Education. It's on their website. Check with your legislators. They'll be sending out information on it as well. Thank you.
So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you to Ebony and Louise. Please. Yeah. As I think the end of the conversation, the place I think it took us to is the place we want it to be, right? Which is, these are intentionally called community conversations, and that's what we mean to spark. And so the question came up prior, when does the conversation start around X? It starts with you. Right, and so the only way that we change policy, and I'm going to focus on the state because I think we do have more control in that respect, it's to get engaged, to become advocates, to become smarter on the issues personally, and then to really get engaged. And so I thank you all for being here as a step in that process. I encourage you to purchase the book from Kindred Bookstores, our partner in the back. I also encourage you to ask our panelists questions when we formally wrap up, and then figure out how you want to take next steps. And I'll share a little bit about some other ways you can do that in a second. But I hope it is clear to everyone that we do all stand to benefit from making progress on this issue. We believe that events like this are vital to increasing awareness in our community about the critical issues and the challenges that we're facing in our region, and that when we really believe that it's a first step again in figuring out how we can all advocate for change. We are, after all, one Fairfield County, and we're all connected geographically, but also economically and culturally and socially. Next slide, please. So if tonight's program was in fact intriguing or inspiring to you, we do ask you to please consider becoming an Ally for Equity. Allies for Equity, I'm proudly wearing the pin here, is a community of philanthropists, activists, and advocates who are committed to creating a Fairfield County where every person has an equitable opportunity to thrive. Next slide, please. As a member, you'll get early access to events like tonight, mixers, workshops, and other great opportunities to connect and build community with others who are passionate about making a difference here where we live. Your annual membership helps to make events like tonight possible. We can go on, and supports the Community Foundation's mission to build stronger, more equitable systems for housing, health, education, and economic mobility, as we discussed tonight. Final slide, please. It couldn't actually be easier to stay engaged and to join this movement. And so for those of you who are interested in becoming allies tonight, it is a very easy process. You can in fact text on your phone right now, A4E to the number 53555, and you'll get a link on your phone to join. And of course, we also always encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. You'll hear about more events like this, more opportunities to learn, to co-create, to ideate. And it is the power to create the solutions to all the challenges we've discussed today really does begin in rooms like this. So thank you for being here tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I look forward to networking with everyone in the room.